So to preface this, I do not work in tech support. There may be many things I do within that could have been solved quicker and more efficiently by a smarter person, but then the story wouldn't be half as long-winded and funny. So my dad is a retired man who doesn't game much, but when he does he loves to play Train Simulator, the old Age of Empire games, and surprisingly Colin McRae Rally. About 2 months ago he told me that he had started getting a weird problem. His PC was randomly blue screening, mostly whilst gaming but not always, and the problem was intermittent and sometimes didn't happen for weeks and sometimes multiple times a day. This already sounded like my sort of nightmare parent tech support issue, but I said I'd help. My only clue was my dad had said that the blue screen mentioned a memory error. This clue ended up being a red herring that led me down the entirely wrong path. So I headed round with some spare RAM I had and replaced his RAM. A few days later he called to inform me the crash had happened again. My dad also had wanted a bigger hard drive, so I decided to get him a new SSD and did a complete reinstall of his system and took his old hard drive out, wondering if that was the issue. I'd gotten my hopes up this had worked because I didn't hear anything from him regarding the PC for nearly 3 weeks. Then it crashed again and I was frustrating back to the drawing board. Eventually my dad was going on holiday for 2 weeks and I asked him to drop his computer off so I could finally solve this issue. I had to reproduce the error myself, I felt, because otherwise I just wasn't well educated enough to fix this myself. But if I found out what the error was, then Google would be the hero. So I took the PC in and loaded up Age of Empires 2 and got to playing. I played that game for about 3 hours but no crash. Weird. The next day I came back and tried some other games on his PC, including his ancient version of Colin McRae Rally, which let me tell you is utterly awful to play with a keyboard and mouse. Still no luck. This was the moment I'd been trying to avoid. I was going to have to actually play Train Simulator to fix this problem. So I steeled myself for the awful experience that was to come and began to play this cursed game. I'll spare you the details because man was not meant to endure that tediousness, but I'll say that after a couple of hours the PC finally crashed. Yet it didn't crash to a blue screen like I was expecting, it just turned completely off, and even more strangely, when I turned it back on it immediately turned back off once it got into Windows. Immediately I thought something in this PC must be overheating, but that's crazy because I cleaned the fans, heatsink and power supply when I installed the new hard drive. Getting to work, I installed some heat monitoring software and kept it on display on my second monitor and jumped back into Train Simulator. It was during some cursed turn in some Highlands Scottish railroads that I noticed the CPU was starting to get dangerously hot, and sure enough the PC crashed moments later. But the fan was working and clean, as was the heatsink. I was nervous the CPU was busted or something because that'd be expensive to fix. But I decided to have a look at the processor physically, though I'm not sure why, because it's not like you can eyeball a broken processor and diagnose the problem, but I went ahead anyway. When I unscrewed the heatsink I got a strange surprise. There was absolutely zero thermal paste on the CPU. I don't know if there had been and it had like degraded away, or the company my dad had initially bought this PC from years ago just failed to paste it. In any case, there was absolutely no paste. I didn't actually have any paste, so I had to wait a day for some to arrive from Amazon, but after that I cleaned the processor, pasted it up and put the PC back together. That's when it depressingly hit me. I was going to have to play Train Goddamn Simulator a final time to see if the problem was fixed. After 4 hours of Train Simulator I concluded I had suffered enough and either the problem was fixed or I was giving up. When my dad returned from his holiday I gave him his PC back and told him to keep playing Train Simulator. He told me recently he's been playing an awful lot and not encountered any issues, so I'm nervously putting this down as solved. There's still some mysteries around this that bug me. What was the blue screen my dad saw? Was there actually a memory error I accidentally fixed during all this, or did he just get confused? Why was it crashing a lot more frequently and in many computer games for my dad but only Train Simulator for me? That one I think is because he plays his PC in a roasting hot attic, at least that's the answer that satisfies me. But most importantly of all, the biggest mystery that still haunts me, why the hell do people play Train Simulator? As I have said in previous posts, back in the 80s I was a member of the worldwide support team for a mainframe DBMS. As I was the only member who was a childless 20-something, I was the one who tended to have to haul ass to customer sites when things got critical. As anyone who has done this sort of work will tell you, this is not as fun as it sounds. So how was the south of France at the weekend? Marseille Airport is a dump. The customer site was on an industrial estate in the middle of nowhere, and when I finally got to the motel at 3 a.m. I discovered that my camera had been stolen. Was a typical post-trip exchange. So we had this one customer in Hong Kong that, due to the specifics of their application, seemed to manage to hit every bug harder and faster than everyone else, and because it was a critical system to the point where if there was downtime of more than a few minutes the knock-on effects tended to make the evening news. When they went down, the company paid attention. One Wednesday at about 4 p.m. the phone rang. It was Hong Kong, and something had gone horribly wrong. One of their key application components just plain wouldn't run, and they needed me there immediately to get it fixed. Well, the symptoms of the failure they were getting were a perfect match for a known problem caused by a fault in a runtime library belonging to the application development environment, but they insisted that they were patched up to date and that this must be a new problem. Pressure was applied up and down the line, and I was duly dispatched on a big paraffin budgie towards the fragrant harbor that following Saturday. When I landed at Kai Tak on Sunday morning, I was surprised to be met by an old friend and colleague who had been dragged in from Melbourne on the Friday to provide cover, and who greeted me thus. "You were right. They had applied that fix, but not in the environment they were running the production job. I figure we fixed it about the same time your plane took off. Shall we go to the pub?" Fatal mistake. After a few Sunday lunchtime pints I got into my hotel and crashed far too early, and subsequently had the worst jet lag of my life until my return flight the following weekend. At least that trip only lasted a week. The previous time I had been hauled out there to help diagnose and fix a problem that was blocking the acceptance test for the entire project. I was supposed to be there for a week and packed accordingly. I fixed the problem, or rather the dev team back home did, while I did all the evidence collection and initial analysis, but the big suits decided that I should stay until project sign-off in case anything else broke. The net result being that I was there for nearly a month in total, the last 2 weeks of which I was simply wandering around Hong Kong carrying a pager, and my mangy-arsed collection of clothing went through the hotel laundry a number of times, sufficient to generate bills that would have paid for me to replace the lot a couple of times over. The expense claim at the end of that one was legendary. Or more tales from the trenches. As I have previously mentioned, I used to be part of the worldwide support team for a mainframe DBMS product. Well, before that I was a member of the team that supported the Office system version of that same DBMS. Broadly the same feature set, but on a completely different operating system. Now the Office system in question was really a baby mainframe. It was an Office system because, unlike the real big iron, it could be run in an Office environment. It scaled from being capable of supporting a maybe 10-12 workstations, up to maybe 100, and could manage the processing requirements of, for example, a small factory, or in this case, a brewery. Now at one point we had what is known in the trade as a complete self-adjusting for all circumstances cock-up of staggering proportions when a maintenance patch release escaped that contained within it one of those patches that fixed 1 DB resiliency problem and accidentally introduced the sort of bug that would quietly corrupt the database without anyone being any the wiser until they attempted to access the afflicted structures. I must have spent the better part of 1984 bouncing around the UK patching databases back to a state where they could at least be accessed. Anyhow, one such affected customer was a brewery in the north of England, and they had been hit big time. Thousands of corruptions that had to be manually patched, and Muggins here had to do it. So I duly rocked up on site at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, having traveled up the previous afternoon, paid overtime. Where have you been half of my working life? And by about 11 a.m. I had patched all of the low-hanging fruit, and it was time to run the integrity checker again. I hit the enter key on the console, and the IT manager looked over and said, "As that will run for a bit, do you fancy a brew?" Now then, a brew in most parts of the UK refers to tea, so I said yes. "Follow me," says that worthy, and leads me off through the offices, up a couple of floors to a somewhat Spartan room with hardback chairs arrayed around the wall, and a large open cupboard containing a racked up and tapped beer barrel, and many pint glasses. We get unlimited beer but no spirits, as we are classed as clerical, The guys on the shop floor get 3 pints a day and the executives get access to a full wet bar, says he as he poured me a pint of their best. The security lodge had hand pumps where the workers got their beer on the morning, lunch, and afternoon breaks, dispensed by the security guards. You don't want people to be too pissed when they are driving forklift trucks after all. The week went past in a blur. I remember the IT manager calling his wife at about 4 p.m. most days to get picked up from the train because he would be too drunk to drive by 7 p.m. To be honest, I don't know how often his car left the car park. At one point we had reached the stage where there were certain data records that simply couldn't be patched back into the correct structures, so we had to figure out whether it was worth the effort of even noting their contents before we simply deleted them. Hence crate of empty Guinness bottles entered my personal lexicon as the upper bound of worthless. That particular crate may still sitting in a pub cellar to this day. More tales from the trenches. This one dates from my time in Malaysia in the late 90s. We were setting up a center of excellence, and as part of this we were to be receiving the first in-country example of new server family from the parent company. Now during this time period Clea Cargo, Mafsaya, Clea Cargo, had some serious form on breaking stuff. Our manufacturing arm loved us as each time a customer in Malaysia bought something there was a very good chance that it would be a 2-for-1 deal, one sold to the insurer as a write-off, and one sold to the actual customer. There's not a lot you can do with a late 90s 50 GB RAID unit after someone has dropped it 20 feet onto the airport tarmac after all but scrap it. Anyhow, so our eagerly awaited server, really 2 rack mount servers with dedicated RAID and power mounted back to back in a single cabinet, there were reasons, honest, had arrived at Clea and we were informed that there may have been issues with the handling. Anyhow, we contacted a company that was supposedly a specialist in handling fragile IT type stuff, told them the details of our goods in words, no high-level offload available so you need a truck with a tail lift. No pallet truck available, you need to bring one. A few hours later we get the call that they will be there in 10 minutes and we head down to the loading bay of our office building. The specialist movers duly arrive. In a standard 3-ton truck with a side door and not even a ramp, let alone a tail lift, with only the driver and his mate on board. They pull up the side door of the truck to reveal the delivery, which sits on a standard pallet, and is about 6 feet 6 inches, 2 meters, high with a 3 feet 3 inches, 1 meter, by 1.5 meters, footprint and a weight of getting on for 600 pounds, 300 kg, and look at us expectantly. A somewhat animated discussion ensued, followed by a heated mobile phone conversation between my boss and the supposed shipping company. As a result of which we were told to wait for some specialist equipment to be sent to facilitate offloading and delivery. About an hour later the specialist equipment arrived, which turned out to be half a dozen hefty blokes loaded into the back of a pickup truck. By this time we had made a cursory inspection of the shipment and it didn't look good. All of the telltales attached to it had triggered, indicating that the thing had been bounced around and tipped beyond the shipping and handling specifications, and worse than that the packaging itself showed impact damage. So, knowing that whatever happened from this point onwards was pretty much academic, we settled back to watch the show as these lads tried to figure out how they were going to get this very heavy, very bulky and very fragile object down off the back of the truck and into the building. So, they looked around the loading bay to see what was available and found the following: 112 scaffolding pole, and 110 length of 6x4 wood. These they proceeded to prop against the truck door as a makeshift ramp. At this point my 2 colleagues and I realized what they were about to attempt and wished that we had a camera to hand. They manhandled the server across the truck bed and by dint of rocking it backwards managed to get it onto the top of their makeshift ramp. They then proceeded to edge it out of the truck door and down the ramp. The 6x4 piece of wood proceeded to bend and creak alarmingly under the load, but by some miracle they managed to get the thing down to ground level without anybody being killed or even seriously injured. So what next? As mentioned, they had omitted to bring the much-needed pallet truck, and there was no way they were carrying this thing to the goods lift. One of the guys went off and borrowed a couple of trolleys from somewhere. These were the sort of things that the mailroom might use to move small packages weighing as few tens of pounds around. Not the vast part of a half-ton of computer, but in for a penny. Again by brute force and a lot of tipping they somehow managed to get the thing up and precariously balanced up on these two hopelessly inadequate conveyances, and proceeded to haul the thing in the direction of the goods lift. This didn't go as smoothly as they hoped, as some of the trolley's wheel bearings gave up their struggle against the laws of physics about halfway there, with the result that black streaks of melted plastic from the wheels were left across the foam marble of the floor as a remembrance of their passage. Once we got up to our floor the process was repeated in reverse, with more black plastic witness marks left to puzzle the cleaners. Then we had to decide what to do with the obviously damaged equipment. Because it was a first installation of a new range of equipment in the country, we had a couple of commissioning engineers who had been flown especially to install the thing, and they had nothing better to do, so they got on the phone to the factory to find out how best to proceed. Once they had removed the shipping packaging and assessed the damage, casing broken, internal 19 inches racks distorted, various mounting bolts sheared, all in all an absolute wreck. They very carefully powered it up, testing for electrical safety at each stage. It bloody well worked. Still had to be scrapped though. The replacement was delivered without incident. Which was a pity, because this time I remembered to bring my camera.